identify an interest group and then
So,
champion.
yeah, Manzi, thank you very much for that intro, because I think that background is key, particularly tracing it from the immediate post-independence period, because it's very easy, right? I was speaking with a friend the other day. They're in South Africa. And the thinking was that when you talk of the national liberation movement, and even the article that I read at the beginning of this conversation, the starting point for the history of Uganda in the contemporary mind that is not very critical about the history of the country normally starts from 1986 and the national resistance movement and national resistance army, right? So when we talk of the dissipation, or when we talk of the unraveling of national liberation movements on the African continent, there's a tendency to always associate that with the national resistance movement, the NRM, right? People often forget, the preceding history of how we've had different political formations that have championed some kind of national agenda, right? And we can say maybe that was that's a deliberate beat on the part of the NRM, that the way that they have curated their narrative and their story and their intervention in Uganda. The history of the country almost always will begin with them and the capture of Kampala in January 86. But I think that history then is very important. For me, a point of curiosity would be, and Comrade Twahira, anybody feel free to come into this, but the question of, if you look around the entire continent, obviously ours was a negotiated independence, right? We did not take up arms against the colonial government, the British colonial government. There was a negotiation that was involved. An election, I believe, was contested prior to the handover of the instruments of power to that UPC Kawakayeka coalition, right? That eventually, again, ended up crumbling. But if you look around the entire continent, there was always a national liberation movement that championed the cause of the entire nation. Now, it wasn't always very neat, but in Tanzania, you can always point to CCM. Obviously, before CCM, there was TANU, which represented the interests of Tanganyika, and what was the name of the other party in Zanzibar? There was another party in Zanzibar.
Afro Shiraz.
Yeah, I think Afro Shiraz. Yes,
yeah.
That represented the interests of the Zanzibaris before that eventual unification of Tanzania and Zanzibar. In Kenya, I think you have KANU. In South Africa, you have the ANC that is leading the negotiations. Of some people now claim that they sold out at CODESA. And other formations like PAC. So you have those contestations between different political formations that are all championing a national agenda, right? In Angola, you have parties like UNATU or UNITA, I believe. You have the MPLA, right? In Zimbabwe, you have ZANU-PF, Mugabe ZANU-PF, and you have all these political formations around the continent that are all, you have the PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau, with Cabral and everyone, and you have all these parties that are championing a national agenda. Why then, at the instantiation of our history, are we having sectarian formations, emerging, along religious lines and tribal lines from the get-go, as opposed to one movement that kind of subsumes all these interests, right, and expresses a national program?